Again, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining today's session of the monthly Ohio Workforce Coalition webinar. Today, we are going to have a discussion with Maureen Conway, Vice President with the Aspen Institute and Executive Director of the Economic Opportunities Program. I will get to introducing Maureen in more detail in just a moment, but before we get started, as usual, we have our housekeeping items. Again, each month the coalition offers webinars on a wide range of topics. We encourage you to check out our website where you can find webinars from previous months, the recordings, and even from previous years. This year is the coalition's 15-year anniversary, which is amazing. There's some of you on here who've been with us for the long haul. So we're excited to still be here. Carter will put a link in the chat. If you have an opportunity to support the coalition, please do so. As I mentioned, the coalition's been around since 2007, bringing together leaders from a wide range of networks across Ohio, specifically working to grow prosperity across the state by advancing policies and practices that grow training and supports available to workers, improve the quality of jobs, and build transparency and equity into our workforce systems. Today's session is in a meeting format so that we can have a robust discussion. So we will be giving you the opportunity to unmute and talk, and please feel free to do so. If you don't want to jump on camera, you can always use the chat. You can ask questions there, either directly to me or to everyone in the group, and feel free to engage with each other in the chat. Coalition webinars are the fourth Thursday of every month. If you have ideas for topics that you'd like us to dig into, or if you're interested in presenting yourself, please do reach out. We take very seriously the opinion of those individuals who are participating in the sessions. So next up, I wanted to just start by sharing a little bit with you about, and it looks like I'm frozen, so I'm going to go off video. But sharing a little bit with you about how the coalition started and what we have been doing over the last 15 years. And I thought this was particularly relevant to today's discussion because the coalition in 2007 really came together around a report called Average Isn't Enough that really documented that 70% of the folks in Ohio who were actually under 200% of poverty were working. And so combated this narrative that individuals are poor and just sitting home and accessing public benefits and so on. Folks are working, they're just stuck in jobs that can't support their families. So there's been ongoing efforts to center the voice of working people throughout the coalition's history, and increasingly to make sure that we are promoting policies and priorities that support companies as well as workers and overall workforce systems. So our most recent set of policy priorities are to create and make sure that there's flexible supportive services available to workers, look at the quality jobs in Ohio and identify whether or not we can establish a job quality designation for employers, and then strengthening our public workforce systems. Today's session really gets to this point about quality employers. And we are going to be able to hear from some of the leaders in the field who have been working to look at what quality jobs really mean. In Ohio, this means that the coalition is working to share information about job quality, what do quality workplaces look like, bring tools to market that can benchmark the quality of jobs across our state, and then connecting job quality efforts to racial equity and benefit cliff discussions. And so recognizing that job quality does not exist within a vacuum, that there are a lot of other pieces, parts that are relevant to a job quality conversation. So I reached out to Maureen and am thrilled to have her with us today. Reached out because many of you have probably seen that there was a job quality statement released by the Aspen Institute and the Economic Opportunities Program in partnership with the Families and Workers Fund earlier this month. And so all month there's been talk about what that means, what that looks like. And I have had the privilege to really know, I've known Maureen for quite a while. I won't put number of years on it, but I have known her for quite a while now. And it's exciting to see the field having gotten to this point, the momentum around job quality. And I feel really lucky to be able to have this discussion with her today. Maureen, I am going to let you go ahead and talk about EOP and your work, and hopefully we will have a robust discussion with the folks on today's session. So, Maureen.
Great. Thank you so much, Rebecca. And it's a pleasure to be here. And when I was talking with Rebecca about this, I was saying, let's have kind of an informal conversation. So I'm going to say some remarks. People are free to interrupt me at any point if they would like to ask a question or share a comment. It's totally fine. And just in terms of the statement that we released, so first of all, I appreciate how Rebecca was framing the importance of focusing on job quality. I have known Rebecca for a very long time, and a lot of our paths originally crossed looking at workforce development strategies. And a lot of workforce development strategies are predicated on this idea that we're going to help people get the skills so that they can get to good jobs. And the problem that we see is that there's just not enough good jobs. So I originally came into my professional work at the Aspen Institute working on sector strategies. And, one of the questions we would always get were, why can't these strategies scale? And I would say, well, there's two reasons. Basically, one is we don't pay for them enough, right? So sector strategies aren't only about specific occupational training. We don't even pay enough for that. But anyway, putting that aside, the big reason is that there's just not enough good jobs to get the kind of outcomes you're looking to scale, right? So you can't scale something that's aiming to fill an opportunity that actually isn't there. And so the other thing that sort of got lost along the way with sector strategies is that they were supposed to be not just market takers, but market shapers, right? They were supposed to be, there was sort of always those two strategies of how do you create access to good jobs for people who are facing barriers of discrimination and other kinds of barriers to good jobs that are not related really to the job. And then how do you make bad jobs better? Because so many people find themselves in bad jobs. So anyway, let me just fast forward a little bit. So we've been working on job quality for a while. We've been trying to think about how do we change the way people think about job quality in terms of from an idea that sort of the way jobs are by market forces to, job quality is a function of human decisions and we shape the quality of work. And we've really been thinking about how do we have sort of a common vision for this. And so the reason we came to this statement was, and there are many, we have put out statements on good jobs, other people have on job quality. So what we did with Families and Workers Fund, we first started by reviewing over 20 different frameworks so that people to try to get a sense of the commonalities. And there's a lot of commonality across these different frameworks. One of the barriers to action had been, though, that I would hear is that people might say, well, job quality is important, but it's so confusing. There's so many dimensions, or they would sort of trade off dimensions that are equally important. So they'd say, well, I can't really do much about wages, so I'll try to do something about schedule flexibility or something like that. So what we wanted to do was sort of both go through the statements and have something that seemed to be a shared vision, but also established kind of a strong aspiration for what good jobs should be. So we went through all of those definitions. We pulled together a cross-sector working group that had folks from business, folks from labor, folks from workforce development and community development finance, had folks from philanthropy and research, sort of a range of different stakeholders that are interested in this question to take a look at sort of a synthesis of these different frameworks and start shaping kind of this shared definition and shared framework for what it means for a job to be a good job. So then we came up with a draft statement. We went through a whole process then of sort of soliciting more feedback on the draft statement. We had focus groups with workers, had focus groups with businesses, and finally arrived at the statement that we released earlier this month. And we tried to come up with a definition that we felt like was encompassing of a variety of things, but also reasonably simple, and reflective of sort of what the things many of us care about, which is what a job means for a person to be able to lead the life that they want to lead. So we have these 3 tent poles for what it is. A good job provides basic economic stability, provides economic mobility, provides opportunity, and it treats people and their work with equity, respect. They have equity, respect, and voice within their workplace. So economic stability is, sort of, it provides the basic family sustaining pay, access to benefits, scheduling so people can manage their time, those basic conditions that provide for stability. Mobility, again, it's sort of accessible training, some clarity on sort of what are pathways, wealth building opportunities, and then, of course, equity, respect, and some agency within the workplace so that people do feel that their work is respected and that they have some power to influence things in their workplace. So this is the basic definition that we released in the context of that statement, and also talked about job quality basically being that actionable continuum. We recognize that jobs, it's hard to take the labor market and divide them up into good versus bad, but there is there is a continuum. They may be good on some things and less good on some other things, but that also you can move along that continuum. There's possibilities for business to create new actions, to have new models that improve the quality of jobs. There's possibilities for governments to do things both through their regulatory power as well as through their ability to set incentives through taxes and procurement and other functions that they play. There's opportunities for service providers to engage with businesses and workers in different ways. So there's a variety of things that different actors can do to try to move jobs from the sort of less good side of the spectrum to the good side of the spectrum. So that's essentially what we're thinking a lot about now, is how do we start to think about those actions. Earlier this week, we released sort of a list, really, basically, of actions and ideas we heard from the multiple stakeholders we got feedback from all along the way about what are actions organizations and individuals can take to try to improve job quality. So we released that. I can try to stick a link in the chat in the moment if you didn't see that. But we're really also soliciting people's ideas at this point, because we know that there's a lot of work going on, and I'd love to hear from folks on this call about things that you're thinking about and maybe working on. We know there's a lot of things people are trying and doing, and really want to sort of be able to collect some of that information, learn about it, and share it out so that people get more things that they can, more tools, more ideas, more things that will help them try to address the job quality challenges in their communities. I'm going to stop there, Rebecca. I feel like I'm babbling along.
Thank you. No, I think that sets a great stage for the discussion. And I apologize if I freeze again. I'm going to leave my camera on until that happens. But so I wonder if I might kick off the discussion. I did invite people, folks, please put it in the chat if you have questions. But Maureen, I'd love for you to say a little bit more about why this point in time, why now was it important to have this statement put out? And you mentioned that there's been various different things released. There's certainly been a lot going on over the last few years, but would love to just hear a little bit more about the timing.
Why now? Well, that's a good point. That's a good question. I mean, no time like the present. But, you know, what I think is interesting about this particular moment is that there does seem to be a lot of interest in this question. So let me back up. So at the Aspen Institute Economic Opportunities Program in 2012, we launched a discussion series we called Reinventing Low-Wage Work, that was really trying to highlight the challenge in large and growing occupational sectors in retail and restaurants and home building, home construction and childcare and elder care, large growing occupational sectors that had low quality jobs, and say, how do we address this challenge? So these are basically the essential workers, right? That all of a sudden we said during the pandemic, oh, look at that. Those people don't have very good jobs and they're out there risking their lives for us. So, so I think that sparked some of the interest, but even before the pandemic put such a fine point on it, I think more and more organizations were seeing, like, you know, the problem isn't the workers, the problem is the work. And more organizations were starting to put out, you know, definitions and frameworks. And so if I did things on, say, employee ownership, I put out a definition that was looking specifically at that sort of lens. If I'm working in maybe small business development and thinking about wealth building strategies, maybe I have a different lens. So there were lots of different frameworks, and they were kind of covering the same ground, but maybe putting an emphasis on different elements. And I think it was also starting to create some confusion if I was talking to somebody who is maybe a funder or a policymaker who's a little newer to the work, saying, well, this job quality thing, it just seems so complicated, right? And there's so many different facets to it, and, you know, I don't know what to do with it, right? And so we kind of wanted to break through that a little bit to say, you know, let's flip that around and make that an opportunity instead, to say, you know, job quality is really essential, and we have a shared vision about what it means to have a good job and for somebody's life, right? But what the multiplicity of actions means is that there's lots of ways you can get involved in trying to address this challenge, right? So if you're a funder coming to it from one perspective, or a policymaker or a business person, you know, here's some ideas you can start with, and let's see how this works within your organization. So that's what we were trying to get to, is how do we have a sort of a big shared vision, so we break through a little bit like the complexity of the language around it and focus more on, okay, so if this is what it is, now how do we drive there?
Absolutely, that makes sense. And I was going to ask about overall reactions from the field, but we have a question from Kyle Fee, who is with the Cleveland Federal Reserve Bank, asking about how employers have been reacting to this statement.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm just trying to do two things at once. So I'm sticking the action pieces I mentioned in there because I'd love folks' thoughts on an hour later on actions. There's a form there. Okay. So how employers have been reacting. I mean, it's really interesting. You know, employers, they are a mixed group, right? They're not all the same. So we had employers in our working group. We had some smaller employers like Sunrise Treatment Center. We had some larger employers. So we got a range of different reactions. There are some employers that think, you know, this is really important and we need more standards around this. There's other employers that are interested in this, in learning more about what makes a job good for workers because they're having a hard time finding people or those kinds of things. And then there are, I would say, and this is probably more true for larger employers, we have a reasonably strong statement in there about sort of collective action, right? So we say ability to improve the workplace, such as through collective action or participatory management practices. We try to be broad, but we do think it's important to push employers a little bit from just a like, oh, you can talk to me, I'll listen to your problems, to like really having some structure of accountability. What does that look like? And they don't always love that, right? So so there was some discomfort, I think, with that piece of it among some employers. That would be, I think, the place where I would see the most, say that there was the most maybe questions raised. But outside of that, I would say employers, I mean, interestingly, we have, I think, a fairly strong statement about economic stability. I don't think we didn't get any pushback on that, oh, but these jobs, can't pay or whatever. We didn't get, we got a lot of appreciation that we had a strong statement on equity within this. So I felt like that was appreciated among employers. At least, obviously we talked to who we talked to, so it wasn't like a scientific representative sample, but yeah, so I would say there was a lot of appreciation for it, with maybe some just caution on some of the worker agency pieces. You're on mute.
Unmute. It happens every session. So I think that's actually a great segue to some of the other questions we're seeing in the chat, one of which is from a local restaurateur. And Sean, please, if you want to come off chat or come off mute, but otherwise I will ask, this question is more about what's the starting point. So as a small business, as someone who's thinking about this and is connected with other businesses who are thinking about how to improve their jobs, where do you start as you're along this journey? And Sean, please add more.
Yeah, thank you. And I'm kind of wearing two hats. I've been fortunate to be working at Fund for Our Economic Future this year, specifically on hospitality workforce issues. And what we've seen in trying to engage the hospitality sector is it's bandwidth issues and starting point issues. It's really not issues about, we don't think that that's a good thing to do. It's more, the toilet broke this morning and I'm short-staffed and I have to fix that. And so, the time horizons are more in the 3-week than the 3-month or the 3-year. So I'm just curious, because we ran into this in trying to work on job redesign and realized our starting point had to be much further back in terms of what's realistic, not from a employer willingness, but from an employer starting point.
Yeah, for sure. For an employer, for capacity, right? What can they do? Yeah, no, absolutely. And we've done some work ourselves with some small businesses and in partnership with some other organizations. And I think one of the things that comes up a lot is to really try to think about what do you know your workers value about the job, and what do you maybe need to know, and try to hear sort of, and it could be a survey, it could be a focus group, it could be just, conversations with folks, but try to figure out what's a way to hear what would be something of value that they want that you could actually respond to, right? So this one organization we worked with, restaurant, right, during the pandemic, had people coming in, they were, delivering food instead of having people in the restaurant, but their workers are taking public transportation to work. They're feeling at risk on this and everything. So they worked out, new schedules so that they actually wanted, fewer longer shifts rather than more shorter shifts, right? Like this wasn't this was doable, right? They could do this, right? They had the ability to do this, and they could work with them and think about, how do I do some things to show them I care about like what they're going through, and I'm going to try to work with them on directing and addressing their transportation challenges that they're feeling right now. So that was a place to start, right? It wasn't a place to end, but it's a place to start. And I think the first thing, to try to sort of listen and find something you can respond to, and then, as you can engage people more, try to figure out more things you can respond to, has been important. The other thing, and it's not, it's kind of thin out there. I mean, I do think, there's a lot of things, particularly for smaller businesses. There's always this saying, when they don't have time to work on the business because they're working in the business. So finding somebody who can be sort of a good coach advisor to them has been really useful. We've worked with some organizations that have people who do this kind of coaching, and that can be really helpful. We worked with we did an evaluation of the Illinois Manufacturing Excellence, sort of as they were redesigning their approach and integrating job quality into their business strategy. That's how I would call it. They have a different word for it, but anyway, but that's essentially what they were doing. That I think is really useful to businesses that, have a hard time just finding the bandwidth to step back, take a look at the business and saying, how can we do job redesign? So, anyway, that's a great question.
And I think that, some of the work I think Sean's referring to has happened in Northeast Ohio and the Cleveland area. And it was pretty striking that we learned that this whole notion of talking to your employees, worker voice, getting that relationship established is such a foundational starting point to be able to have those job design conversations. And it's almost like there's a workplace redesign rather than a job redesign, so that the conversations really, really shift based on what you hear. And so we have another question that I think is relevant to that. And that's the fact that there is this continuum. There's both the continuum of how employers are talking to workers, as well as who's talking to employers about their work. And would love to hear you say a little bit about how do we define success at those different points along the continuum? And, there's are there system level indicators and then worker level indicators?
Whew, got a lot in there.
Smart people on the call, Maureen.
Yeah. This is a really tough crowd. So one, let's see. I think for an individual company, right, you'll think about indicators in a particular way, right? So start looking at, and again, it depends on what's been a challenge for you, and sort of what are you working, right? But typical things like turnover, internal advancement. If you have indicators of morale or things like that, that can be helpful. Sometimes you'll see things that have to do with productivity-ish kinds of measures for particular kinds of companies. So it's going to look a little different, right? Some companies, it might be more like absenteeism and tardiness and things like that, but you'll start to see behavior changes that also influence the performance of the company. And the goal is to be trying to sort of get to that like virtuous cycle. It's interesting the way you were talking about. I was going to say, no, it's like a relationship redesign, because I think one of the things that causes some trepidation for business owners is to start that conversation is, like they know this is not a great, maybe like these wages aren't that great and everything, but they don't have the resources to deal with it. And so they don't want to start a conversation on something that they feel like they can't address. And I think what often comes up that's surprising to them is, like the workers know you can't do that either, right? Like they know that too. So, but maybe there are, and so if you can start the conversation, you can find the things that are the starting point where you can address things. I think when you think about system indicators, right, like then you want to see, so are we starting to see, population level outcomes? And if we're not, what are some other intervention points? Because I guess the other thing I say is there's only so much you can do within the confines of an individual business, right? The individual business operates in a competitive market, et cetera, right? There are limitations to how much they can unilaterally raise their wages in their particular industry, or whether they can afford benefits, and whether it's even a good idea for your benefits to be attached to your place of employment, right? So do you really want your employer, controlling your childcare? So, so I think, sometimes you might want to think, is there some advocacy we can do together as like a collection of small businesses about how do we solve the childcare problem for our workforce writ large, and not think that it's my job as a small business to solve all these problems for my particular employees, but there's more of a societal solution here that we need to kind of work together for. So those are some other things to just, as you're starting to look at, are we getting to the system outcomes that we want? If we're not, what are the system barriers and how do we start to address them?
And that actually
Hi, Jill.
Jill came out. That was Jill's question, by the way.
I have so many more strands to that, but okay.
Has me thinking that, you started off talking about sector partnerships, and, we may need to be organizing employers differently as we're thinking about, geographic clusters, or, just different ways to organize given the issues that workers need us to be addressing for them. So I want to turn the microphone over to another colleague that I've known for a while. Great to see your face on the call, David. David Hamilton, do you have a question you want to share? You muted.
Yeah. Okay. I put a question in the chat. I'm working now, long since retired. Used to be in workforce development, workforce education. Maureen and I have worked together, as well as you and I, Rebecca. But that was a long time ago. I'm a volunteer now with a group in Zanesville, Ohio. And we are interested in, at the same time, doing both supply side and demand side interventions in the local labor market. In that connection, I came across a neighbor of Maureen's, something called the Rocky Mountain Partnership in Colorado. One of the few organizations that I've ever seen that really did have a supply side, that is to say, workplace strategies and interventions, and they have recruited at least a number of employers, although many of them are nonprofit and governmental rather than private sector, private for-profit sector. I was wondering if there's anybody on that call, on this call, who is either connected with them or knows something about them. They also have metrics to measure job quality in terms of wages or earnings.
Yeah, so I should say, yes, I am from the Aspen Institute, but our headquarters is actually in Washington, D.C.
Oh, sorry.
Although I do spend a fair, no, that's okay. I do spend a fair bit of time in Colorado out at our campus in Aspen, but yeah, so I don't know them. I don't know them well. But I do think this question of metrics, how do you setting metrics and sharing metrics that you're going to sort of benchmark your progress is important, and thinking about what are reasonable metrics. Another just thing that we worked on was this, we spun off this organization called Working Metrics that basically looked at sort of wages, internal turnover, internal advancement, break it down. I think it really is, it's critical that you make sure you look at these things disaggregated by race and gender to the degree possible, so that you make sure that you're addressing all the equity issues that we all know are there. And there's, so what it does is benchmark that against sort of a wage standard, as well as a relevant standard for the industry. So companies can see how they're doing in terms of job quality relative to their industry peers. So So that's a different way to do it. That can be useful in particular contexts. In other contexts, you might want something that's a little bit deeper and more diagnostic, right? This is a little bit more outcomes focused rather than what are the processes that might address problems. But I think and I bet other people have ideas about metrics. I think this question of what is the data that you use is really important. I also think, just like Rebecca was asking about how to think about how you're doing in the labor market as a whole, I think you can do sort of a job quality analysis of your regional labor market every year and just sort of see, is it getting better? Is it getting worse? And again, making sure that you're also, doing it disaggregated by race, ethnicity, and gender.
Maureen, so along those lines, assessing the quality of the jobs in a regional labor market, I agree, very important. This is the Ohio Workforce Coalition is a statewide policy advocacy group. And so we're thinking both at what's going on at the local and regional levels, but then what sorts of changes need to happen at the state policy level. And I'm wondering if there's examples that you can share specific to job quality. We have talked about the creation of a job quality designation across Ohio that would give quality employers priority access to contracting or budget funds for workforce issues. Are there other examples of strategies you've seen really work? Are there reasons to tackle this more on a regional level than a state level?
Yeah, so that's, all levels are good. So I think that question of sort of, I've seen a few things around this sort of job quality designation and preferences, right? So one was with working metrics. Actually, the first pilot we did with working metrics was with a hospital system in Cincinnati, right? And they used it for procurement purposes, right? To pick a medical equipment supplier, and they sort of had the applying the bidders, put their employment data into the system. It's designed to be a pretty light lift, and they benchmark them. Of course, they assess them on other things besides job quality, but luckily the one that was the best on the job quality measures also won the bid. And the good thing about that process was then in the sort of post-bid conference with the people who didn't get the contract, they asked the hospital system, are you going to keep using this? And they're kind of like, well, yeah, because, as a hospital system, they felt like good jobs are important to sort of, people being they're associated with good health, right? And community health and all these kinds of things. So they said, yeah, we think this is a good idea. And so then the companies say, oh, okay, well, then how do we get better at this, right? So that's exactly what you're looking for, right? It's for people to take it seriously in that way. So you can use job quality measures, certainly in procurement. The other thing I've seen people do is sort of do some kind of assessment that's like a modified B-Lab kind of assessment to see who are the better employers that, and I've seen like New York did this for a while. I don't know if they still do, and Baltimore did this for a while. They essentially kind of help market those businesses to the community. So they'd say like, here's a best for NYC company. And those would be more sort of customer facing kind of businesses where the, local government's kind of giving them some marketing assistance. So those are a couple of ideas of how you can use that strategy.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think I love those ideas. I'd love to hear what other ideas you all have, particularly because we've got such a wide range of organizations represented on the call. I want to shift a bit to a guest on the call from the National Restaurant Association to share a little bit more about their work and see how that kind of fits into the job quality conversation.
Hi, can everybody hear me?
We can.
Excellent. My name is David Farrow. I'm the Senior Manager of Workforce and Business Development with the National Restaurant Association. I was not expecting to speak on this phone call, but I think a lot of what's being discussed on this phone call is really germane to the hospitality workforce development equation right now. I think one thing that's different, you know, when I look at David Hamilton and think about his career, there have been different narratives surrounding hospitality workforce development within the public workforce development system that were changed by the pandemic. And I think the main thing that changed in the pandemic was really paradigms on the public sector side of, yes, we need to look at hospitality workforce development, but also on the employer side, what does it mean to have a good job in hospitality? Which is why I'm a guest in this conversation, because we have to speak to our employers about illuminated career pathways, understanding that when I started as a Gen Xer, I started because it was a job I could get as a 16-year-old with other dreams, right? Well, it's different in the 21st century, and we need to take my 15-year-old and explain how they can become a regional manager or an executive chef. And we know that's a difference, and that's part of having a good job, seeing a sustainable pathway in front of you. And we know that in a lot of cases that comes with professional development on any level, whether that's certificates in the beginning. I think most people on this phone call understand that when your employer provides professional development, you feel more respected, you understand that pathway illumination. So our association is working with state restaurant associations around the country to build bridges. And I'll leave you with this, because I could talk a long time about it and completely monopolize this discussion, so I won't do that. But I was at a national conference for workforce development professionals last year and leading a workshop in front of a little over 100. I said, how many people in this room would like to have a great working relationship with their state restaurant association so that we can illuminate good jobs in our industry and sort of dilute the narrative that you're a dishwasher forever? I've been the dishwasher guy forever, right? But I have a hospitality career pathway that's taken me to 153 different countries. I've worked with some of the great Fortune 500 companies in the world, and I am not an anomaly within the industry, but I had mentors who illuminated pathways for me. So our industry is understanding that, and we need excellent conversations like this so that I can go back to the leadership of our national association and ask them, what does it mean to have a good job in the hospitality industry? I can hold my hand up for that, right? But can our opportunity populations say the same thing? Can our justice impacted populations say the same thing? I'm here to say to groups like this, that hospitality is on board for the conversation. And I'd ask this in the end, everybody who's had a job in hospitality, you know, give me a reaction that says, yes, we're the training ground for bankers, you saw what happened in the pandemic, right? When our industry takes it in the teeth, mechanics fail, hairdressers fail. I mean, we're an engine, right? And so we understand now that in this era of really reshaping paradigms, right, that employers have to be part of that conversation and again say, what does it mean to have a great job in hospitality? Thank you so much for asking my opinion. I will turn off again here and listen to what I hope is a continuing great discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yeah. I really appreciate that. And I really, you know, because it's hospitality and like, you know, my first job was cleaning hotel rooms. Wasn't actually a very fun job. And then I then switched over to restaurants and did work waiting tables, you know, through high school and college and graduate school. So, you know, and there's the good side and the not good side and all of those kinds of things. And I think there's lots of things in hospitality that are very, you know, aligned with this. There are lots of things you can do to improve some jobs. It's not necessarily just wages, and training is one, but also many other things in terms of supportive management and so on. But I will say one thing I just want to say for folks that I think is also interesting is Just Capital, the Good Jobs Institute, and RATSA. I knew I was going to forget the third organization and that other one. Work together on a financial wellness initiative. They were working with larger companies, but they were working with these companies to sort of say, you know, the financial wellness of your employees impacts the operations of your business. And they were working with a diverse set of companies, from PayPal to Chipotle to AT&T, Prudential, and, you know, really got some of these companies to take a look and say, like, you know, okay, we're paying our call center employees more than, good by industry standards, but when we compare it to what they need to live on, not so good. And so what do we do about that to make sure that they have, that basic economic stability so that they can succeed in their workplace, recognizing those two things go together, right? So we've really seen, companies embrace this in different ways. And I just wanted to bring that up because the ways we think about benchmarks and what does success look like, sometimes we need to question the benchmarks that we're using and whether they're the right benchmarks. And also we need to try to think about, like, are there ways we can redesign jobs so that people can get to that economic, have that basic economic stability? Because the other thing from sort of my social service side, I see in workforce development programs and in jobs, if people don't have this basic economic, people are focused on economic mobility, but if they don't have basic economic stability first, achieving economic mobility, being able to follow some kind of illuminated career path is just too difficult because people's lives are too unstable and it's hard for them to really kind of bring their best selves to work, learn what's available to learn, and then get to the next step because there's just too much instability when you don't have basic economic stability.
Thank you for that point. I think that, the question of the benchmarks is critically important, as is sort of this discussion about who work is working for and who it isn't, and who gets repeatedly left behind and stuck and experiences the occupational clustering that is so prevalent still today and was certainly highlighted by COVID. And so along those lines, we have another kind of obligatory, I think you said, data related question. There's so many multiple dimensions of job quality that can be difficult to quantify. Are there specific efforts? I mean, you mentioned working metrics. Are there other efforts that are specifically working to quantify job quality?
Well, Families and Workers Fund actually has been running this very interesting job quality measurement initiative. And they were looking at job quality through several dimensions. So one is kind of like from a business perspective and how do we think about business measures for job quality? Another would be sort of from a program service provider, like workforce development-ish kind of perspective. And that's where, I worked with that working group a little bit on some of these things about how would you do a job quality analysis of your labor market and how do you think about that? And then how do you have some tools to have conversations with the companies you're working with around some of the job quality challenges? There was one that was really interesting that was on a sort of more like administrative data, like how do we, if you think about next Friday, we'll get another, it'll be the first Friday of November, we should get a jobs report, but we don't get a good jobs report or a bad jobs report, we just get a jobs report, right? We act as if any job is a good job, even though we can see that there's so many jobs that people can't make a living on. So how do we start to think about what are our public measures for understanding this, kind of more in that sort of economic policy making, what could inform that? They had this really interesting idea of that, just like there's sort of a consumer sentiment survey, there should be sort of a worker sentiment survey. I think it would be really interesting. So I think there's a lot of different levels at which we can be thinking about job quality measurement, and they're doing a lot of work on that. So that would be one resource I would refer people to.
And they're doing some exciting work. Absolutely. So that has me kind of shifting a little bit. So we've got a nice selection of, a bunch of names I don't recognize, which doesn't happen too often on these calls. Usually I know most of the folks who've dialed in, but what that kind of lifts up for me is this notion of kind of the folks who are thinking about systems and policies and the big structural issues, and the folks who are doing the work on the ground, talking to companies every day, kind of where the rubber meets the road. And I'd love to hear any thoughts or, comments, recommendations you have about how to get more of this work out to the field, how to get more support to the folks who are having those conversations with businesses about how many job openings do you have and what do they look like. There's a variety of efforts that do kind of various components of that, but what are you seeing on that front to operationalize job quality?
What am I seeing?
Well, anyone, I guess, from a discussion perspective, we heard what the National Restaurant Association was doing. I think we get stuck. I have to take myself off video. I'm so sorry. I think we get stuck a lot between great ideas and what we know should happen, and then the ability to actually make it happen. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think, there's some things that I think are easier to sort of move forward and other things that are sort of a little bit more challenging, right? So I think, so for example, like, I think there's a lot of, I've been in the workforce development field for a long time. I think, giving people access to build the skills that they want to build that will help them pursue the careers they want to pursue. I think that's super important. I think a lot of people are comfortable with that and will agree with that. And so sometimes that can take up all the focus. And so it's a good thing, right? But it shouldn't come at the exclusion of, I mentioned the childcare issue at the top, right? And the childcare issue is really problematic. We have this way of thinking about childcare in this individualized kind of manner. But, it's not just the parents of that child that need for that child to have quality childcare. Sometimes it's that the parent's boss, and right, and it's our society as a whole, right? So I think, we don't think about how do we sort of build shared solutions for some of these more intractable problems. And so, of course, that leaves, the inequitable burden on women primarily who are dealing with kind of the childcare, either as underpaid childcare workers or as overworked working parents, right? So I think I'm trying to sort of figure out how do we not go towards the one that we can all agree on, and how do we build forums where we can have a disagreement with, about something, and maybe learn from each other and learn from each other's different experience of a problem, without it just, you can disagree without being disagreeable, right? So how can we start having those conversations? Because some of these issues are just really difficult, right? And I think we all have our own slant. And I think having some forums where we can start to see it from different perspectives can maybe help us think a little bit more creatively towards shared solutions.
Disagreeing without being disagreeable is such an interesting topic for this time of year with the election. Yeah, interesting that we should all remember that. So we have just a couple more minutes, and want to give anyone an opportunity really to jump in if you've got a burning question. There's some comments in the chat around benchmarking and the different measures of job quality for different people. We will share a number of resources when we circulate the recording. Maureen, I think we should also include the piece that you and Mark wrote about childcare and the case for universal childcare and the points that makes. Let me see if there's any. So there's some comments about reach and career advancement. But let me turn it back to you, Maureen. Any parting thoughts? Anything you want to leave us with as we go forth into job quality advocacy work?
Yeah, I just want to appreciate everybody being here and the interest in this topic. And I guess my perspective on this question of like, should we do this or should we do that? Yes. Like it's not a singular solution kind of challenge, right? There are a number of different actions that need to be taken. As I mentioned, there's sort of definitely things business can do, but business can't do it on their own. I think there's definitely things that we want to have done by the public sector. I think we need to rehabilitate the idea that government can and should do some good things, because they have a role to play. They certainly shape a lot of how work plays out in our society. I think there are things we can think about as in social service. I think there's things we can think about in philanthropy. There's things we can think about as consumers. All of these actors play a role. So I just wanted to say that I think if there's not a silver bullet, and there's many kinds of different things, and really trying to think strategically, how do we knit these things together, and then have a real goal. Like, do we think jobs should be good jobs? Do we think that there are some people who should work and live in poverty? And if we don't think that, people who are in certain jobs are not, if we think that childcare providers or home health providers or other workers who provide important roles in our community are worthy of a dignified living, then we should figure out what's the strategy to make that happen. And not just sort of say, oh, well, we can't because something, right? We can if we want to.
Thank you for leaving us on that note. And if you are interested in continuing to be part of this conversation in Ohio, please reach out to me, info@ohioworkforcecoalition.org. You can check out our website. We're on Twitter, tweeting away, and we're so grateful, Maureen. It's so always great to have these conversations with you. Thank you so much for your commitment to Ohio. You've been here on many occasions, and we'll look forward to keeping in touch.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Take care, everyone.